this work session of the Assembly to order and begin with a roll call. Mr. Holman, could you start us?
Oh, yes. Paul Holman, Anchorage Assembly.
Dick Training Assembly.
L.B. Gray Jackson.
Debbie Osiander,
Chris Birch. And Mr. Starr was just here recently.
and he's out in the hall on a phone call. Bill Starr will be joining us.
Marty McGee, Municipal Assessor.
Jerry Redlick, Deputy Assessor.
Very good. The floor is yours, Mr. McGee.
Thank you. As every year, we like to give you an update on what's happening with your tax base and with the assessments. Today, the assessment notices, the green cards go in the mail, and the data for the current, this year's assessment is live on the website. So property owners, this starts the 30-day protest period, which is established by statute. So within the next 30 days, people have the right to file appeals. They'll be contacting my office, asking me questions. I know they'll be contacting you too. So the reason for this information to
Or you might say also they do have to follow a $100 fee that's refundable.
That's right.
If they end up winning.
It's a deposit now. So for the typical home, it's $100, but for higher value property, it's more. But yes, in order to have a legal filed appeal, a deposit has to be made. And we're going to work.
I just wanted him to notice that in
Yeah.
case there's somebody here writing it down.
Okay.
Thanks,
Gray
Marty.
Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. How much more?
There's a schedule that's in the municipal code.
Okay.
It's based on the value, so it goes up to about $1,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Your house, not mine.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll lead you through this, and we'll be happy to answer questions. The thing that drives value in real estate is the economy, and the most important elements of the economy, which are kind of forward-leaning, are the income and jobs in the community. What's happening in Anchorage locally is different than what's happening in most of the rest of the United States, and the reason is that we have retained our jobs, our employment base, and the income associated with the community. So we have not had the kind of decline in real estate values or rates of foreclosure or other bad impacts that other communities in the United States have had. That being said, we're not immune to what's going on in the world economy and in the local economy. The market for capital and investment, especially in the commercial property, is very much affected by what's going on in the rest of the country and the world. So what you're going to see in some cases, especially as we talk about what's happening in residential property and when we talk about what's happening in commercial property, is something that may not be easily intuitive as to the result. Commercial property values haven't increased, even though we have low vacancy rates and stable rental rates and occupancy of that type of property. But the market for that type of property and capital available to build, buy, and sell that type of property is affected by what's going on in the rest of the country. And so that's what causes it to be still pretty stagnant. Now the big story as we go through this whole thing are two elements. One is everything that we do in assessment is driven by local market data. And so there isn't anything we've invented that isn't supported by what we have observed in actual sales, cost of capital, rental rates, things that are really happening in the local community. Anyone that calls us and talks to us about the value of their property and why it changed up or down, we have data to support it. We will have discussions with them, and there's information behind it. The other thing is that overall, the value change is very little. We really have a stable, flat market. Even though as I go through particular individual statistics, the statistics are true, but they all require an explanation. So you may see a property category going down 1% or one going up 5%. The overall story is, behind that, is that the market is flat and most property owners will see almost the same assessed value as they did last year. What are the exceptions to that? A couple of pieces. One is we have visited and re-inspected 18,000 pieces of real estate. That causes us to change the description of the property when we do that. Those changes may result in value changes greater than the typical 1% or flat market. That's one piece. The other is we worked a lot on land value, specifically land value associated with multifamily residential property. We have very few vacant land sales. The market in Anchorage in prior years has been driven by a lot of speculative pressure to develop condominiums specifically. that emphasis has almost entirely gone away. So the value that was created by competitive market forces to increase and change that property, the emphasis has gone away. So we have taken that into consideration when we've done the value. If you want to generalize in the big picture, R2M, R2, and R3 value, large developable tracts, the value went down this year, not up. That's the reason why I did that. The smaller developed tracts, we don't have very few current vacant land sales. So we've done analysis of the improved property sales, and we've done analysis along the lines of what the correct proportionate amount of value associated with the land is. That's caused us to change land values. So you'll see some land value changes as we go around, and people will call you up and talk to you about that. The total property value typically didn't change, except for the 1% that I'm telling you about. And the other exception would be new construction or demolition. So if they built something, made an addition, upgraded their property, that caused their value to go up. And we will have a lot of discussions with people about the description of their property. That's probably the most common reason we would change value. That's the first line of inquiry we'll make when the customer contacts us and says, what's up with the value of my property? We're going to go over the description of the property, try to get that right. It's easy to get adjustments on that if we can get inspections and if the actual physical property supports the adjustment they're asking for. Now I have a map behind me here, two of them. One of them is one with a green background, is a percent change map. And what it shows you is that most of the community, plus or minus 5%, which is what the green represents, that's what's going on with that property. And I haven't forgotten Eagle River and Goodwood. They're on other maps, you'll see them, but this is the only one I printed. And the other is the less than 5% change are the brown areas. And then the red areas are greater than 5% change. And so the reason for the change is what I just described, and we'll go into more detail as we go through the presentation. This other map over here is re-inventory. That's the property we visited. Now, this is difficult for us to display on a map because you wind up with the whole subdivision or the whole condominium project lighting up, because that's the way we're doing the work now. That's how we're getting more work done with fewer people in less time. But you'll see big blocks of area that looks like we changed all the value or re-inspected all the property in there. Well, we did re-inspect all the property. It doesn't mean it actually changed. And we also have maps for the outlying areas of our work. We've visited property all over the city. We didn't just pick one area.
If I could interrupt just to let everybody know, Ms. Drummond has joined us for the record, and Harriet, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for being late. Mr. McGee, this is fascinating. Those are those maps available online? And if not, could you make them available?
They're available as part of this presentation in the packet we have, which we will make available to anybody that asks for it, any assembly member or whatever. But I'll caution you, these maps, because of the scale of the map, they're really hard to interpret and read whenever they're on a smaller scale than something big like what we're doing here.
Understood. Thank you.
So this is the basic underlying information we use to do our assessment. We are asking questions of buyers and sellers of every piece of property where there's a recorded deed transaction. We get quite a bit of information provided to us from various sources through appraisals that are presented to us or done for the city or somebody else. Direct owner information is the buyer and seller. Financial institutions record deeds of trust. We look at that information as an indication of what the value is. We research financing programs so we understand changes in criteria for financing, and there have been some significant changes in the past year which has affected market value. We look at appraisals, and we contact directly real estate professionals, both realtors and appraisers in the community, and we solicit their information and their ideas about what's going on in different categories of property. This is our whole tax base. It goes all the way from equipment to portage. We track all of it, and we use basically the same modeling techniques in all of it. Almost all the residential property is done on a cost basis right now. That doesn't mean we don't use the market information to calibrate the cost models. We do. But in order to get uniformity in the valuation and to make a more consistent value change from year to year, we have shifted to a cost basis for most of the residential property. This shows you the breakdown of your tax base. It really hasn't changed much in the last few years. So the components of commercial real property, which includes multifamily residential, and the residential and personal property, this is how the pie breaks down. I want to take a minute to talk about this one a little bit. A lot of people place emphasis in different areas. Each one of these bars represents a strata of property and its contribution to the total tax base on a value basis. And I'm going to use the office value, which is a light blue bar in the middle of the commercial section there. It's fairly wide, just to illustrate how the pieces fit together, and it'll help you understand how value change is going on. So the office segment there represents 5.98% of your total tax base. Within that office segment, 1.8%, about $522 million, is the high value or high quality of construction offices, the A-grade offices. Most of the information in the community is focused on that segment, that sliver of the overall piece, when they talk about trends in offices. So, for instance, a report was just released to the Building Owners and Managers Association. The guy that did the work, and I know him well, used to work for us here at the city. I discussed it with him. The single piece that he feels he's tracking it all accurately is the A-grade property, not the rest of it, not the whole segment. And so what's going on in office space is that as new buildings are being built or new buildings are being occupied, we're not bringing in new tenants into the community. So it's taking tenants out of another building and moving it into that building, which creates a vacancy in the stuff that's not as desirable. That makes it harder to rent. That means that more rent concessions come out of that. This is a common trend in the retail property and in the office property, and to some degree it's also affecting industrial property in the same way. So when you see, there's some positive economic information about what's going on in offices, we have a low vacancy rate, a very low vacancy rate compared to the rest of the United States. There is not a decline in rental rates at this point, but focused on the A-grade property. Nobody's really tracking a lower quality property very accurately. So what goes on whenever I report a very small increase in total value for offices, you can see the proportionate impact of the other stuff, and that's sort of the story on assessment. We have to appraise and assess all the property, not just a sliver that is active in the marketplace. So that gives you a picture of what's going on for each segment of the economy. We are using all the different approaches to valuation, the cost approach, the income approach, and the market approach. The models are specifically built primarily on the cost approach, but for instance, in the income property, we do a lot of income property analysis. We track rental rates. There are very few sales in commercial property to use to calibrate the market, but we do have active market for leasing. So we track what's going on with leasing, and that gives us an indication. The other component of that whole income thing is the cost of capital, the capitalization rate. And even though lending rates are very low, the other part of the cost of capital, equity, is quite high. And so most appraisers feel that overall it's had a negative impact on value when you look at the total rate of capitalization. It's very difficult to borrow money right now, and it's hard to find alternative investments if you sell one of these commercial properties. This gives you information. Now, we're mandated by law to visit property once every 6 years. We are meeting that mandate. We have visited 18,466 pieces of real estate this year. That's above what we were required to do. So we're doing well in terms of meeting that mandate. How did we accomplish that, even though we've had a reduction in staff and historically? And what are we doing? Well, we're doing it smarter. That's one of the things we're doing. So we don't just chase around appraiser going from one property to another back and forth across town. We send them out to do the whole subdivision at one time, the whole area at one time. That helps. We also have visited, we emphasized condominium re-inventory this year. That's 14,000 units that we visited this year. We are able to get more of those in a shorter period of time than we would typically do in houses or commercial property. So that's why we're exceeding the expectation this year. Now, these maps get a little bit squished whenever we try to fit them on the format. So this is the same information that's on this map over here on re-inventory. And it's showing you that we're visiting property all over Anchorage. We typically visit the whole subdivision when we go there. That's why you'll see big blocks of red. And then you can see the impact of what we've done. Go ahead to the next slide. So we also visited property in Eagle River, all the way out to Eklutna, up and down the Eagle River Road. Next slide here. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I think is a helpful piece of information, and there's actually quite a bit of information for you on this slide. This is looking at specifically residential property, improved property, so we're talking about stuff that hasn't changed in any way, and the value change for that property. It's not an addition on it, and it wasn't affected by our re-inventory project. So the population we're looking at represented on this slide is 52,000 out of a total population of 85,000 pieces of real estate. It's a special group. You can see it's what I call high and tight. In the middle part, with a value change of plus or minus 1%, represents the majority of the property. Plus or minus 3% value change this year, and this is overall value change, is 61% of the population. And then when you look at 5% plus or minus value change, you're at 94% of the population. So you can see the statistics I'm giving you are an accurate representation that most of the property didn't change very much in value between last year and this year when you look at overall value. Now, some of them, the land component will change more than that, but we adjusted the total property value to compensate for that. And it's based on actual sales and market data.
I apologize, Marty. Could you repeat those three numbers, the 1% change, plus or minus the 3% change? I got 63% at 3%.
The two tall columns there,
Okay,
if you add those together, and I don't have a percentage on those, that's the 1% change.
okay. But that was the majority.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's, and then 61% when you go out on the bottom, 3%. If you add the columns that are inside that limit,
Okay.
you're going to have 32,000 pieces of real estate that had a 3% change plus or minus.
Okay. Thank you.
You can see how that works. Now, what's going on with the tails? Because there's property out there. Almost all of those have to do with the land value. It's typically a large lot with a small improvement, so the land value changed more and the total value changed more than what would be typical. Land value changes, I'm not representing their 1%, they're more than that. And we did work to try to improve that. In fact, we have improved it when you measure the assessed values against the sale price.
So one property got a 200% increase in
Yeah,
value.
yeah.
But he wonders who that is.
I'll probably hear from them. And you may too. And we'll talk to them. But you know, we have market data to support that, but there are not very many of them. So
Where's Westwood and Hood Court? Or that was last year, not this year.
that's right. And in the 1% change, they're very
This
little
year.
change from
This
the prior year. And you know that we had. I can talk about that a little bit because I think that's another important thing. We don't have any area of town subdivision group of property which is going to have an increase in value, total property value, greater than 8% this year. Now, in those subdivisions, we were talking about something on the order of 20% change in value from the prior year. So those people were angry. However, we had 3 subdivisions that happened in last year. We only heard about one of them. The other 2, they accepted the value because it was evident to them too that the value change was appropriate. And by the time we worked through the whole situation with those folks in that particular subdivision, only 2 of the property values got changed by the Board of Equalization.
And they were for issues.
Yeah, there was usually a physical description issue that caused the value change. So that's what's going on. I don't expect you to have that kind of reaction from anybody in the community. It's going to be a surprise to me, and it shouldn't be a surprise to me if we do. But that's what we have overall. Okay. So this is the same map that I've shown you here, different way of displaying it. Again, the story is that there's really not a big value change issue this year. The R2, R3 type property, duplex, multifamily property is the one I would expect the most reaction to. Okay. Eagle River, same story. This is the result in the different areas. Girdwood, same story, nothing really dramatic going on in terms of value change in that community. Okay, now this is your total tax base, the number of properties, total value change, the overall change is less than 1%. So this is what we use in the budgeting process now, the performance value result information. These are available on the municipal website. There are 3 measures that we are using to measure the performance of the office. The first one is value, and that's by a ratio of comparing the sales value to the market to the assessed value. We're within standards set by the International Association of Assessing Officers, pretty close to the historic trend, and actually we've improved some from the prior year. And that, a lot of that was a result of the land value work. Measure 2 is the number of properties inspected, and I've told you about that. And measure 3 is the appeal response. And so you see that we are meeting our goals with regard to our response to appeal. Okay. So this gives us a historic picture of what's gone on with the whole appeal and informal review process. And in 2011, we had the lowest year we've had in terms of total interactions with the public. Majority of our interactions are direct contact, where we're talking to the property owners. The informal review process worked about the same as it did in the prior year, and is very successful, I think, in resolving issues without having to go to formal appeals.
Mr. McGee, Ms. Gray Jackson has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, Marty, do you think that the numbers are affected because there are folks within our community who simply can't afford to pay $100 to get their property reassessed?
I don't think so. One reason I think that is based on my knowledge of all the different types of properties and people that have contacted us. So people down to the owners of the smallest condominiums and mobile homes contact us, get value adjustments, interact with them, and have the right to appeal, and sometimes do. Almost all the time the deposit is returned. The only thing a property owner has to do to get that deposit returned to them is to cooperate with the process, participate in the process. You don't have to win. That's important. The outcome of the appeal isn't what determines the refund of the fee.
Okay, so the answer is that this fee has no effect on folks who are out there in the community that may want to challenge the city.
I think it
They
has no
can't afford
effect
it.
at all.
Okay, I appreciate that answer.
And I
Thank you.
really encourage people to contact us and talk to us regardless, because we often are able to resolve their issue. Most of the time it's a description of property issue without the requirement of any kind of appeal. We do make adjustments. We make quite a few of them each year.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Marty, not last year, but the year before, we had talked about some problems we heard in terms of internal contradictions, in terms of information available to the public. Somebody might come to your office and get a different answer from the person at the counter, and then different answer from the material that you hand out, and then a different kind of a response if they went to the appeal process about the board's response. Have you worked on that at all?
Yes, I don't think we have a significant problem there, but we're monitoring that activity. So if that has happening, and it does happen, I don't disagree that it does happen. One way I do it is through training. So if I am aware of a situation where somebody's providing an inconsistent answer, then I typically do training for the whole staff to correct that, so that everybody gets on the same page as to what the answer should be.
Yeah, that was identified with the ombudsman discussion, if you remember.
And we have been working a lot with the ombudsman to make sure that we're getting consistent and accurate information out. So we've spent a lot of time this year working with them on our forms and other pieces of information.
Okay,
that we're
one
putting out.
last question. There was also an ombudsman issue about release of methods. I know maybe I'm not got the right wording here. If they had a piece of property, they wanted to know how you evaluated it.
Yeah.
And you told them that you'd give it to them, and then there was some confusion if they ever got it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well,
I know it's specific.
Okay.
Jim?
Are
We
you
had one
releasing?
specific case that we worked with, and we did send him all the information. Of course, he ended up saying, well, I want to buy some real estate, so I want to know the model so I can put it on an Excel sheet. And we had to indicate to him, you need to talk to a realtor or somebody to help you make decisions like that. That's not our job function. But on his particular property, we gave him everything about how it was calculated.
I don't know about a particular case. I just know that this is an issue that came up, I thought, several times with our discussions with
Well,
you.
to my knowledge, there are like 3 instances where they've had an issue with that.
Okay, Lucinda, do you remember
I
this?
remember that there was a concern in the applicant's about whether or not we were properly communicating to folks after they had gone to appeal.
Yeah.
And so we recognized that we were not properly disclosing all of the rights to folks who appealed, and we have since fixed that.
Thank you.
And that has been corrected.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hummon?
And I think I've worked with a couple of folks in the office there, so I apologize, but it's, I got cornered again by one property owner specific on the east side, but, and I'm trying to get clear. If someone has recently purchased a property, and so they have an appraisal that was as part of that transaction, how long is that appraisal valid, and how long does this office use that, know those numbers?
Well-
As a basis, I guess, or is it?
On one level, we'll accept it no matter what its age is, but we're going to have to adjust it.
Right.
Typically, within 3 years, so 3 years going back is where we'd say that has a lot of validity, and older than that may not. But typically, we're accepting 3-year-old appraisals as the basis, but we will do time adjustments to the conclusion if it's 3 years old.
And right now, the reason that is relative is that our time adjustment is very small. So the last 3 years have been relatively flat, so it is good information.
And that's, I guess, what the issue was in his case, and I'm not sure, but I believe he told me, I don't know if that's what's on the website, but I believe he said, someone may have been inconsistent info, told him it was 5 years,
Yeah.
up to 5 years in recency.
Yeah.
And then every year from the minute he bought the property, it jumped up not 1%, not 5%. I mean, it was a significant jump, like $30,000 or $40,000 off of like a $200,000 purchase. So it jumped up significantly, and then it was adjusted. And he thought, okay, it might go up a couple percent.
Right.
The next year went back to the same number plus some, the same number that was
Yeah.
corrected before it was corrected. Anyway, it was just one of those confusions, and I had a real tough time trying to walk him through. And I did refer him to your office, and I know he was discussing, but the man also works out of town a lot. He's on the slopes. So he has the frustration of not being able to just call up today and come tomorrow. And
Right. And we do quite a bit of interaction with people using the web, so that's one way we can try to solve the problem of somebody that isn't here interacting with the staff and getting results quickly.
okay.
Thank you, Mike.
So that leads me to website success. Our website is getting a lot of hits, most of any website in the city. There's definitely an increase in the use of the information. We don't have a lot of information in terms of a survey or something that says exactly why they're going there and what they're using the website for. So anything we do there is an inference. But we know we're getting a lot of use, and we hear feedback from people that it's helpful to them, that it resolves their issues and answers their questions. So, and we're continuing to work on developing the information we have there and the way you navigate in the website. So any customer feedback we get about that, we take into consideration. We're in the process of selecting and entering into a contract for a new computer system. The system that we have was purchased about 1986. It's that vintage. It's a mainframe COBOL-based system. We are able to use it and make use of it, but it's expensive to administer, and it is not using the latest technology and techniques. And so that's what we're looking for in that. And we are close to a final decision on that process, so we'll probably be hearing more soon about that. Now we'll get into the specifics of what's going on with individual types of property. This gives you a summary by commercial and residential of how many pieces there are, how much value there is, and what the overall change is. And so you can see there's this consistent pattern of change overall. The residential property, new construction is a story. It's decreased from the prior year, and the latest predictions are that it will decrease again in the next year. There's less residential new construction going on than there was in the prior year. And that was a part of that, what I was telling you about what's going on with land values. So that people buying tracts of land to develop into new real estate, there's less market pressure for that, less competitive activity. Commercial real estate has increased, but the rest of the story on that is that we don't have in-migration, we don't have a lot of change in population, we don't have a lot of change in income. So whenever we increase the supply of types of property, and we don't increase the demand for those properties, then it has an impact. And in assessment, we have to assess every single building. So the old strip retail competing with the new Tecate Center is adversely impacted by the fact that Tecate Center is successful and is growing. Whenever a new big box store opens, it usually does at the expense of smaller retail facilities. So that's what's going on in retail. In industrial.
I'm sorry, Ms. Gray-Jackson.
You can finish and then I'll ask the question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. In industrial property, a very low vacancy, but the difference between what you can rent industrial property for and the rent that supports new construction is almost 25%. It's still much lower, so that's why you don't see much new construction, even though you see full occupancy for that type of property. And no decline. We're not losing people, we're not losing market share, but dynamics within each market segment are shifting.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, based on history, there was an issue with assessing residential and commercial property at its true market value. Past administration fixed that to some extent in terms of the residential property, and I'd like to know where we're at with commercial property in terms of assessing the true market value. And I like I think I want to hear from the state assessor too, if that's okay, Madam Chair. Thank you.
You want me to talk first, or you want to hear from the state?
You go ahead, Mr.
Yeah.
McGee, and then Mr. Van Sant.
Thank you.
Would you join us at the table?
One of the following sections here will be about commercial property, so I'll go through it in more detail there. But we have put a lot of emphasis on the cost to construct. So we have made an effort to find out what the actual cost of construction is in the local area, and we have improved our cost table somewhat in that. So that improves the accuracy of what's going on. We have put a lot of emphasis on the income approach, which is the other alternative when we don't have sales. And we just don't have sales for most commercial property. So there's no way for anybody to make a statement based on sales of whether commercial property is accurately assessed or not. There are too few and there's too much detail associated with the transactions. Based on income information, the thing we are able to track vacancies and operating expenses and rental rates because of publicly available market data. The thing that nobody has been able to do very accurately is determine the rate of capitalization. And that's true of the private fee appraisers. I've had a lot of conversations with them to compare whether what I'm using is similar to what they're using, and it is. It's similar to what all the private fee appraisers are using. Their ideas about what's going on with value of property in different segments is pretty much in concert with what we have. And when I get to the actual section in commercial real estate, you'll see we have more appraisals in our file this year than we've had in prior years. Now, all the appraisal does is it might be producing groupthink in a way, but it confirms at least that our picture of what's going on in that market segment is the same as the private fee appraiser's idea of what's going on. But it's a challenging, very challenging market segment to track, especially in the current economy. We have this odd phenomenon here of low vacancy and yet maybe declining value. And the news to the BOMA Association from the private guys surveying the market was rental rates are not going to change. You can't increase your rents. Tenants should not expect that their rents are going to go up or down. And depending upon the segment you're in, either it's difficult to negotiate a better deal or it may actually be in the favor of the tenant in some cases. And Steve, comment?
Thank you, Marty.
Madam Chair, Ms. Gray Jackson, for the record, Steve Van Sant, State Assessor. Actually, we don't get a report from Marty until July. So as all this is new to me too, we haven't really been monitoring what he's doing up till now. We won't monitor that until July. Typically in the past, not just with Anchorage, but with all municipalities, we really don't get a breakdown on commercial versus residential because there's not enough commercial data. We like to look, as Marty indicated, we like to look at the income approach because there's not enough sales data out there. For example, now you've got an abundance of hotels now, but how many of them sell? You know, very few of them sell, so there's not a whole lot of sales data out there. So you use the income approach. So that's typically what the market's going to look at. How much is the property producing in revenue stream, and then they'll capitalize that into a valuation. And we don't get that information from Marty either. So, so our analysis on what the on what the commercial property is doing is pretty limited right now.
Any questions?
Mr. Holman?
Marty, on residential, and I'm just looking at, I'm not sure what the numbers, the discrepancy may be. On slide 9, page 9 on the handout, residential shows a number of 85,960.
Right.
But on page 11, upper slide, it breaks down residential market clusters to 74,146.
Yeah, I'll explain that as we go
Okay.
through. Okay. There's some information in there that's not, each one of these statistics kind of has to be taken separately, although we have tried to make them so that it's easier to follow than maybe it's been in prior years.
Okay.
So there's your summary, and I will move on into more detail on what's going on now. Like I said, we are tracking listings. Listings are interesting market information. There's no confirmation of what the real value of property is because they tend to list high and sell lower, and they change as time goes on depending upon the market dynamics. But we do pay attention to listings, and we use that as one check against what's going on as our picture of what's going on from sales. So when we get a ratio like this of 94%, which is comparing the assessed value to the listed price, we think that's representing accurate valuation. That helps support. The one we pay the most attention to is the sales, because those are documented facts of price. There are 2,607 deed transactions recorded. Now, interestingly, I'm going to show you in a minute a comparison to the MLS data, but about a third of all the transactions that are going on in the community are not part of MLS data. They're transactions that are happening outside of that system, so they're not included in their statistics. They are included in mine. We attempt to confirm sales. We think we have what we call a representative sample from the sales data we have. So that's what we have actually been able to confirm from buyer, seller, party involved in the transaction, and we think we're at 96% of the assessed value. Now that means that we have overvalued some property with known sale price as in the assessment process. That's what this statistic means. So we'll be talking to those folks probably, but by aiming at the middle and trending the values that way, we're accurately valuing and giving fair tax treatment to all the property owners. Yeah.
Marty, when you get the letter back from those folks that declare their price, do you change the value in the computer if it's not right or doesn't match?
What we do is we load that information into our sales database, and then that's used to do our model calibration as we go forward.
For that specific property or in general?
You know, we don't match. That's called sale chasing or matching. We don't match our assessed value to the sale price. What we use that is when we get to this 96%, for instance.
That's what I was talking about right
yeah,
here.
Yeah, definitely the information is in there and used to measure our accuracy.
But if they reported the wrong value and we find other evidence that happened, we will update our system to the correct sales price.
It's just, you know, I would imagine that they're coming in if they in fact have an assessment higher, but then they can prove up on the market paperwork. They're probably thinking that that's
our policy on that, internal policy, is if they come in with documented sale information and it's within 10% of the assessed value, we typically adjust their value to the sale price.
That works for me. Thank you.
Maybe pulling them out of equity from one point of view, but I think it's fair treatment. So, and sometimes the kind of question Paul asked is it kind of gives us in a trap when you do that. They can look back 3 years and say, well, you adjusted my value and now you won't. And the reason why is we have this other market data that supports the assessed value being different than the sale price. And after the third year, that's where we go.
Mr. Trainee?
Thank you. This is both Marty and Steve. A couple of years ago, the state changed the definition of religious exemptions. And I don't see a chart in here that tells me how many pieces of residential property have gone off the tax rolls because they're now claimed as a residence of ministers as the church defines them. I need that information. Can you give me a chart that shows me how many parcels of land in Anchorage and their assessed valuation are off the tax rolls because of this?
We can tell you each year how many houses are exempt.
Because I want a chart from when the state law was changed to now as to the increase in the property going off the tax rolls. You know what I'm talking about, Steve?
Yes, sir, I do.
Yeah, I can probably provide that to you by tomorrow, but.
Okay, thank you.
On that point, Madam Chair, I agree with Mr. Trainey's request, and I know I noticed, I looked up a property in a particular residential neighborhood. You'll go down the whole street, and there will be, 3-bedroom, built in 1972 or whatever, a whole list of those. And then you get to the one that's exempt because, for religious purposes, and there is no description of that property in the property tax page.
In the public page.
The description has gone away, right. And that's my concern, fits with Mr. Trainey's concern, because at some point in time, that religious institution might sell that property and it enters back into the public sector. Where has that property description gone, and how do you
We are
put it back
maintaining a
in?
record of the descriptions. I don't know why it's displaying, we'll look into the issue and answer you about why it's displaying the way it is, but we're maintaining a record of the description of the property.
I'm not
At
really
least that's the
concerned
point,
about the
yeah.
chapel of the denomination, but I am concerned about the residential properties.
Yeah.
We can get that.
Thank
Send
you.
it to all of us. Thank you. Can you send it to all of us?
Sure?
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, this is defining these things in a certain way. The statistics are true, but in some cases, the statistics don't tell the whole story, and particularly with this 5% decrease in condominiums. There's a group of condominium property, which are the, I want to go into all of the detail here, but some is required for your knowledge. What we're calling site condos now, specifically the site condos that are developed under the Kiowa law that are defined as PUDs. Those we have moved where they fit in our categories of property. They haven't gone away, the value didn't decrease. We moved them into a different cluster. And the result of that, because we're measuring overall value change when we report this statistic, is a 5% decrease. The real story on condominiums is that their value is almost the same as it was last year on all categories. There's probably one exception with the high value condominiums that have gone down some. But and so there's more information in here that we'll give you. The statistic is accurate, but it's somewhat misleading unless you understand the whole story. And that's why we put that footnote there to explain that. And if you have other questions on that, I'll answer them. Okay. So this is what's going on with residential property. Then we move into this slide, which is the way we define these things into different groups of similar property to do our valuation modeling. And so down here at the bottom of that list, you see the individual categories of condominiums. Now, where these individual categories went down a little bit, that's mostly associated with this change, and where they went is the categories that went up. So the townhome and patio home that went up, that's the result of not having a cluster with not a lot of pieces of property in it. You can see under townhomes it's 1,239. Adding another 100 pieces of property in there caused that to change a little bit. The statistic is accurate, but the overall story is it's a 1% change or thereabouts for almost all the different types of property. Now, duplexes and triplexes, we still have a pretty robust market there. The value did go up on those, and it's well supported by the market data. The overall change to the central bowl is a little bit of a phenomenon, but there's a lot of property in that category. The high value condominium upper range townhouse condos there where it went down 18, and upper range multifamily residential condos went down. That's because the market has not had good acceptance of these high-value condominiums that have developed recently, so that has caused their value to go down. That's the story on that.
And this 74 that's different to the other one is this has the re-inventory properties in it, where the other chart with only 52,000 didn't have the re-inventory properties in it. So that's the difference between 52 and 74.
So altogether, in our whole population, there's about 14,457 individual units that are in the condominium categories. Give you a picture on that. 375 units were moved as a result of this change in the modeling technique. So there's your overall value and your overall change. Now, again, this count, the number of properties changes as you slice and dice the database differently, but when we're categorizing as residential property is the single-family patio homes and zero-lot lines, not the condominiums, not the other stuff, the duplexes, triplexes, and so forth. So the count of those is 55,000. And what we're trying to do with this statistic, which we give you almost every year, is to give you a feel for the average detached single-family home, how much value change is going on with that, and what's going on with our sales ratio on that type of property. And that is the bulk of our tax base, that type of property. And then another picture on the same piece of information, what's the change? So what are we doing with commercial property and how are we doing it accurately? We are tracking listings of commercial property. We are tracking our listing ratio, which is lower, and we would expect that with commercial property. There's more variation between the listed price and the actual sale price of that type of property. This is how many sales we have, not very many sales, 32 confirmed sales. We do make an effort to find out when commercial property sells, what the full story is. And then this is the sales ratio that comes out of that, but that sales ratio is accurate. It's always a challenge to defend that as being a completely authentic representation of what's really going on with commercial property. And a number of appraisals, we have 30 now in our appraisal library. It goes back a couple of years, but it's more than we've had in prior years, so that helps us with our confidence in the way we're setting value with that. And this is what, now, we include fourplexes and multifamily 5 units and up in the commercial category. Fourplex market has quieted down a lot from what it was in prior years. It was pretty robust and the value was increasing a lot from year to year. That's almost entirely stopped. There isn't a lot of foreclosure activity in that type of property, which is good news, so it's not falling apart, but it isn't moving forward. Multifamily, larger units, the story there is that rental rates have stayed stable for quite a long period of time and operating expenses are going up. And the current rental rates don't support new construction. So we have almost no new construction of that type of property. It's getting older, it's more deteriorated, and the overall picture is -2% as a result. Retail is similar. You know, we're not ignoring the new stuff that's being built, and most of that comes on at its replacement cost, at its new value. But the new stuff tends to occur at the expense of older property, and so they're having trouble finding tenants and sustaining rental rates. I've told you what's going on in office buildings. Hotels. Now, the hotel bed tax has increased at a much higher rate than this for the past couple of years. But the whole picture on hotel property and what it'll sell for supports the 3% increase. We have used a 3-year trailing average when we're talking about expenses. So we had a decline in hotel net revenue a couple of years ago, which we didn't follow down to its bottom by using this trailing average technique. We held the value up. And in the same way, as we go forward, we're not increasing as fast as the market is recovering from that low point it had. We're adding some more hotel rooms to the community, believe it or not. And we really don't have, we have some increase in leisure travel especially going on. But in our view, the increase in the demand for the space is not matching the increase in the inventory.
Mr. Trainee?
that's my other question is inventory still keeps me increasing. I mean, there's one going in off of Tudor and C Street, another hotel going in there.
I'm really surprised that it occurred at all. Most of the major lenders have told us they won't lend on hotel property and they won't add any more to their portfolios,
Okay.
including Ada. So that guy found financing in a different way and did get a new building. Each building seems to be going after its own little niche market, so that to some degree they don't compete with each other, or they haven't up till now. We do have some of the older stuff coming offline now. Some of the East Anchorage hotels and some near Lake Hood are, not being used, or they're either being shutting down whole wings of rooms or also going out of business altogether. So that's kind of part of the dynamic that's going on. And the thing you'll see typically economically is that these guys will build these things until the market collapses, and then we'll have an oversupply. So hopefully we've actually avoided that by not adding a lot more hotel rooms to what's going on. And we do have growth in especially the leisure travel part. That doesn't support year-round hotels, but there is some growth in that.
As we're dealing with hotels, that monstrosity on Northern Lights. Pigeon Coop?
Yeah.
Used to be the McKay building, now it's over there.
Yeah.
What is the status of that building? Are we planning on condemning that or shutting it down? And how is that thing being assessed for value?
I have some value on the building, not much. Most of the value currently assessed against that property is on the land. What we've seen at Anchorage, that's a fireproof steel frame building. We really have never seen a fireproof steel frame building demolished in Anchorage. The property owners have told me that they intend to demolish it or make a major change to it, but they haven't committed to any specific plan. So they haven't taken out a permit to demolish the property, nor do they have permits open, to my knowledge, to change the property, to improve it.
So how are we assessing it?
Well, I assess it based on what I think it'll sell for. So the site, the land, it's full value, the same as any other lot up and down that street. The improvements, I've taken what we call a percent good, and we've dropped it down to almost nothing. I don't remember what it is. It's like 2% of its total replacement cost, to show that the frame still has some value. The property owners argued with me about that, but that's where it is right now.
And are they paying their taxes?
Yes, the taxes are being paid.
Okay, so they're not delinquent?
Not to my
It just
knowledge.
looks like hell.
No.
And actually, the young man who was tagging buildings, the graffiti artist,
Yeah.
they put one on there and it was immediately painted out, and I thought it looked a whole lot better with the graffiti.
I know the property owner has spent some effort to try to control the property so that it doesn't deteriorate more or people don't get in it, but that's difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a percent change map then for the whole Anchorage Bowl area, showing where the changes are occurring. Commercial land value changes. Most commercial land value is basically the same as it was last year. We've increased some in the South Anchorage area where there's some development activity going on, but that's the basic story. And this shows the same information but on a price per square foot basis. So it gives you an idea. The downtown core, of course, is the highest value property in the community. The major intersections tend to be the high points of the value, and it sort of radiates out up and down the arterial corridors in terms of value in relation to that. A little bit of movement, in the Diamond Abbott Road area, so that's increased somewhat. A little bit of movement going south on the old Seward Highway, but not much. And the east side of downtown really hasn't had hardly any changes.
Mr. Birch?
I just had a question on, there's been some discussion regarding industrial land, and typically if you have a piece of property zoned industrial, you can do industrial or any lesser intense,
Right.
Use of lesser intensity on that land.
Right.
And there's some discussion about saying, well, if it's industrial, you can only use industrial, you can't use a lesser. How do you anticipate that would impact value? And, it seems
If you limit use, it's going to have an impact on value.
down.
Well, depends upon the property's location and its attributes. The I-1 property, the strongest demand for that has been in a retail type use. So if you limit I-1 from retail, it will have negative impact on some property. Now, like I was telling you about industrial, though, we have a really low vacancy on industrial. So somebody seeking space almost has to build. So there is a demand for, it's limited right now, but there's a demand for other industrial users. The heavy industrial, I-2, is a different story, and there isn't very strong demand for that presently. But that doesn't mean if, for instance, we had a major pipeline under construction or major activity on one of our oil fields where they want to do fabrication and that sort of thing, that demand wouldn't occur and wouldn't occur pretty fast. In the stuff associated with the airport, it seems to have a decline. And there's a decline for property owners are coming to me saying there's a decline for the demand for airport-related, freight-related space at the airport. Now, one side of that story says as soon as the world economy recovers, that will come back gangbusters. And the other says, but today's market, there's actually a decline in demand for that type of space. So it's less valuable than it was a year ago. And you know, we do a lot of wait and see. My approach is we get to revalue this property every year. So we look backward at what happened. We try to look forward at whatever the trend is. But I don't need to try to go too far at crystal ball gazing and changing values, anticipating changes, either in land use regulation or in demand, supply of stuff.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the big yellow spots at the top and at the left. The left being the airport, where I get regular reports from the airport as representing that part of town.
Yeah.
But we don't tax that anyway because it's public land.
Right.
So, but the land values affect, and the fact that the port is adding a considerable number of acreage in its controversial addition. Originally, it was going to be about 130 acres, and I believe in the scaled-back version, it's about 65 or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that land is
All
not,
of that,
however, taxable as industrial land?
well, all of that publicly owned land is taxable under something we call possessory interest. So we tax the tenant.
Say that word again?
Possessory interest. We tax the tenant's interest. It has to be under a lease before it's taxable. You know, I'm going to generalize, but most of that we regard about $10 a square foot, which is industrial land value, as the basis for that. And we look at there's usually appraisals associated with these leases, so that helps us somewhat too. So any increase in the space that's available and used will be taxed at market value in the railroad yard, at the port, or at the airport. And we're not ignoring that. This picture is somewhat misleading because that's showing you stuff that basically is the untaxable exempt property is showing up as the yellow as it's represented here.
But as the port adds that industrial, that marine industrial to the inventory, does it then change? What changes for you when they add that inventory in there? And
It's under lease.
Has it been added yet?
It has not been added yet.
Okay.
If it's under lease, we're going to reflect what we think the lease tells us the value of the property is.
Okay.
So we'll come on at market value as the demand. Now, the amount of marine industrial that's proposed seems to be way beyond what the demand for that marine industrial is. As long as they don't offer it all for lease at once or put it under lease and let the market forces drive the value down, which is not their intent, as I understand it right now, there won't be any decline in the value or the assessment based on that type of property. Certainly the railroad is looking at the same thing, and they want to sustain the value of their property and maximize their lease revenue, so they don't intentionally do something that sabotages the market.
We are rapidly running out of time. Mr. Stark.
Well, two concepts that apply: the property, the payment in lieu of taxes. Does your office then also assess the other properties that are in that program under the same formulas as we've talked about throughout?
Not directly. Payments in lieu of tax are contract agreements, things like base housing. I'm not sure exactly.
Well, it could be, or the National Park Service building or something like that.
Well, the Park Service building is taxed under this, is actually taxed as fee simple, because if a private property owner leases to the government, the FBI building and the Park Service building,
Yeah.
that's taxable like any other office building in town.
All right, that answers my question for that, with the Clutna Corp and the FBI building, I think is how that one came out. And then I will want to have a little more expanded conversation, or maybe a policy statement on your summary of valuation based on leases. airport use leases in particular with hangars. I get that all the time.
Right.
Over the decreasing number of years available on the lease,
Yeah.
and you're still jacking the lease rates up.
I know you're real interested in that, maybe it's worth us.
Only because I feel a lot of questions, Marty. I have to be able to tell them
I understand
consistently.
that entirely, but I think rather than me, I can give you what I've got that we give to the public as the information, but it might be worth our time to sit down and talk about it some, so you get.
Well, the lease rates, they have a valid point in the lease rates that Merrill Field, for example, charges the individual square footage versus where you start to assess that.
Right.
There's a disconnect in that. So,
And we're having conversations like that at International Airport now too.
well, and Birchwood will be right behind them too, especially as these leases set the larger,
And the
million,
supply
2
and
million.
demand factors for that type of space is changing.
Well, there's no more buildable land that I'm aware of at Birchwood.
Yeah.
Merrill's about close to the same thing, so how are you valuing the leases as they decrease? That's all. I just need to be able to tell people that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, can you wrap up in about 2 minutes, Marty?
Yeah, I think we're almost done. So personal property can be a short story. There really isn't much change in personal property. We have not lost inventory and equipment. Our businesses in the community, mobile homes is about the same as it's been, so that's the dark bar. The value associated with that, you can see. The little bar at the top that's blue is infrastructure associated with utilities, pipeline property, which has been shifted to the real property tax roll. It hasn't really gone away, it's just represented in a different place. Go ahead. And that's the end of our story.
Computer's going to update tonight, then, or when does it update?
It's actually current today, right?
Today, it just went in.
They're in.
I just checked mine.
I checked mine at home.
Okay.
Went
Thank you
down.
very much.
Where's our
Just
list?
one really quick.
I missed that list.
Which list?
When you give us the list of all of the assembly members'
have
homes
to
and the
look it up
mayors
here.
and all that stuff. I've got it.
That happened to the last mayor, they don't do it anymore.
That's right, we don't do it anymore.
Ms. Gray Jackson, concluding
Thank you,
comment.
Madam Chair. So, first off, I want to thank you for doing another great job, like you do every single year. You and I, Kelly, talked a little bit about one of my concerns, and one of my concerns is letting our senior citizens know that there's an exemption out there. And I know that the rest of us are going to pay, but that's beside the point, and I know that the state's not paying, funding, it's an unfunded mandate, but that's too bad. But our citizens need to know. I mean, I talked to a couple of seniors within this past month who had no idea and were very, very happy. But we need to figure out ways to let our seniors know, and I'm real adamant about that. So I would appreciate some help again in that area.
Try to follow up on that. I have tried to get articles into the Senior Voice.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. And I've gone to the Senior Center and talked to folks a couple of times.
Great.
So those are two efforts that we're making to get that information out.
Excellent. How about a banner on our website?
We can put information, we have
I'd
information
really like
about
to-
it, but I think
Well,
it's
no,
not
I
as
mean, on the
obvious as
front
you'd like.
page, when it's tax time, like January 1st, put a banner on there for maybe a month saying, seniors, do you know, or whatever you want to word it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of seniors out there that don't know.
I think the deadline is March 15th.
We
Well,
are-
yes, March
Correct.
15th
We
for
are
everything.
fine.
Thank you.
So